What's going on, guys? My name is Drew. Today I'm going to be talking about the Scor 4060. This has been my daily driver for the past 2.5 years. I've put a lot of miles on it, ridden it a lot of places, bike park laps, long backcountry missions. Got a couple races on it, not too many. I feel like I've really put the bike through its paces, and I have a lot to say about it, both good and bad. So this is the long-term review of the Scor 4060. I think it's important to start out that I am not affiliated with Scor at all. I purchased this bike with my own money and was just genuinely interested in riding it. So Scor as a brand is under the umbrella of BMC. The way I understand it is that during after hours, some BMC employees were interested in prototyping, designing, and producing a longer travel, more aggressive bike. So they did a lot of different prototypes, tested them, and then launched the 4060 as their flagship bike. What initially interested me was the geometry of the bike in terms of reach, stack height, travel numbers, the ability to run it mullet. It checked a lot of boxes for me. If I were to design a bike on paper, it would have very similar numbers to this. In addition to the geometry numbers, the ethos of the company, just designing a bike that's fun, a little more playful, branded as that, really spoke to me and my riding style. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the parts on the bike, but I'm not going to go into crazy detail just for the sake of the length of the video. It's in long travel mode with 160 mil in the rear and a 170 mil Fox 38 up front. A mullet wheel set. These are DT Swiss EX511s, a GX transmission. I've got GX 165 mil cranks as well as an O chain on there. I'm running 150 mil dropper post, one up. The bars are cut to 760 and it's a 35 mil rise. Those are the one ups, as well as a one up 40 mil stem. TRP DHR Evo brakes. And then we got an Assegai up front in double down casing, as well as a, what is that, a specialized, I don't know, it's whatever their mud tire is, DH casing. Just kind of threw that on there. I've been burning through tires this year. Yeah, so I'm not going to get into the weeds on all the different intricacies of the parts, but I think it is important to note how I've got it set up. It's pretty burly in terms of tire choice, brake choice. You know, it's got a 38 on there. So it's not light, it's more focused on descending. So that contributes to the way it rides and a lot of the things that I'll say going forward. I'm gonna leave the geometry of the bike on the screen. This is what Scor has provided. Although they don't give you any geometry for running it in this configuration as a mullet in long travel mode. So I'll also leave what the geometry is that I've calculated of what the bike currently sits at. So my initial impressions of the bike, it was very clear. I remember riding this bike for the first time, there was a couple things that stood out to me. The first thing is your riding position. You really feel like you're sitting into the bike and not on top of it. I think there's a couple things that go into this. I think the lower bottom bracket height when it's set up as a mullet, I think a decently high stack height, and then a higher rise bar. It really feels like you're sitting upright, which encourages good riding position. Your chest is up. It's easy to drop your heels for steeper braking. So that's the first thing that I noticed, was your body position really feels like you're sitting into the bike. The second thing that I noticed was the amount of grip that the rear end has, specifically as you're turning the bike and leaning it on an axis. I think just the way that the back end tracks, braking, and just on steeper, looser terrain, and especially as you're cornering, it's just got a lot of grip back there. Every bike is gonna have a breakaway point where your tires lose traction, whether it be a flat turn or a berm, you're gonna lose traction at some point. And that point with this bike feels extremely late, which is a good thing. As you're leaning the bike over, you just feel confident that the bike is gonna hook up and have traction and you're not gonna slide out. So as I was getting used to the bike, those were the first couple things that I noticed. It did take me quite a bit of time to get used to the way that this bike corners. in high-speed turns, you want to feel as confident as possible. And that's one thing with this bike, is you have to be spot on in terms of body position, where your weight is as you lean into a faster high-speed berm, or it has the tendency to understeer. Lower speed turns, like technical, steeper turns, I think the bike does really well. The head tube angle isn't too slack where you feel like you're just getting bogged down. If it's a super tight turn, you may have to nose pivot, but otherwise it gets along with slower speed maneuvers pretty well. So one of my favorite characteristics of the Scor is the way that the rear end of the bike feels. It ramps up nicely, it doesn't blow through the travel. It's got a nice firm mid-stroke and then a nice bottom out as well. I've never had any super harsh bottom outs. It just feels very supple and ramps up exactly how I would want it to as you're going through travel. Now, while it's supple and smooth, it doesn't feel like you're disconnected from the trail. I think there's a lot of bikes out there that, yes, they're very smooth, but it just is so dead, and you can ride them fast, but you kind of lose the fun characteristic of feeling the trail. And I think that's what this bike does extremely well, is it retains that suppleness and that confidence-inspiring, softer rear end, but you don't lose the feeling of the trail. And what that encourages is just playful riding. You know, it wants to pop off things, it wants to pump, your energy isn't lost as you're pumping through rollers. So it's a great blend of being supple, yet you can still feel the trail and it's still a fun bike. So I am running an O-chain on this bike. O-chain is a device that helps separate pedal kickback and just general chatter from the rear end from your feet. It uses elasticimers to allow your chain ring to rotate. I noticed from the beginning that you get a very high amount of feedback through your feet with this bike. After I put the O-chain on, it really calmed the rear end of the bike down. I hate to say it, but it was kind of a night and day difference. Not to say you can't ride it at a very high level. That's just one nuance, is a large amount of feedback through your feet. Another con is the low bottom bracket height. I'm running a 170 mil fork, and I feel like that's about as short as you can go in the mullet configuration. When I first set up the bike, I had a bit low shock air pressure, as well as I was running 170 mil cranks.
Oh, shit. Oh, shit, that hurt. Oh.
I was having so many pedal strikes that I was seriously considering selling the bike. I didn't think it was going to be rideable. I swapped to 165 mil cranks and I got my rear shock set up properly, and I've had considerably less pedal strikes. And what that also tells me is that you can't set this bike up as a mullet in short travel because that bottom bracket height will just be too low. And then another con is I was only able to squeeze a 150 mil dropper on this bike. So you just need to go into it knowing that you can't run a super long dropper post on this bike. As far as serviceability goes, I feel like this bike is fairly easy to work on. The rear brake cable routing is pretty straightforward. I've swapped brakes around a few times, and internal routing is always a pain. This one doesn't stand out to me as too much of a pain. I will say the dropper post cable though is a pain in the butt. It took me a good 40 or 50 minutes to snake that thing through, even using the Park Tools cable routing tool. Only had to do it once, and I'm very thankful I've not done it since. The headset cups aren't super easy to swap out. This isn't something that you're gonna do trail side. It needs to be hammered out and then aligned very specifically in terms of the orientation. I also don't know how great that is for the carbon to be always installing, reinstalling your headset cups into the carbon. But otherwise, the serviceability of the bike is great. It's pretty easy to work on. No additional complaints there. A pretty big issue that I had was the pivot bolts working themselves loose. It seems like on the second frame, there's much more Loctite on the pivots, but I would definitely check your pivots, make sure they have plenty of Loctite on them. And I've heard from other people with the 4060 that this is a common problem as well. Let's talk about the durability of the frame. So I'll start with the paint. I've ridden bikes like the Transition that have awful paint, that chip if you look at them. The paint on the Scor is honestly pretty tough. Plenty of shuttles, plenty of spills, bike tipping over, banging against stuff. Honestly, there's not that many scratches to report. I would say the paint is very durable. The bearings have held up great. I pressure washed my bike, don't have any play, not a ton of stiction after 2 years of riding and pressure washing. The chain slap guard on my first frame did fall off. I fixed it with some duct tape. That definitely could have used a bit more glue from the factory. Scor has an integrated chain guide, and that bolt loves to back out. Again, you could probably throw some Loctite on there, but mine has worked itself out quite a few times. So I have cracked 2 of these frames. The first one lasted 2 years before I overshot. It was a pretty big jump. It was about a 25-foot jump, and I overshot it to flat another 10. We were actually recording the turn right after the jump, so we didn't get the video of the jump or me landing, but you can definitely hear it.
Oh, Greg. Holy. Oh, my God.
Here's what it sounds like. Oh, it's not doing it, of course.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
There it is.
Yeah, a little crunchy. Oh, yeah.
The second frame only lasted about 2 months. This one really had me concerned. It cracked in the same exact spot as the first frame. I came up just a tad short, but nothing that should have cracked a frame at all. If you look at the size small, the amount of carbon between the bottom of the head tube and the cable routing cover is not very much. So this leads me to believe that it just wasn't tested enough in production, specifically the size small. It looks like the medium, large, XL all have a bit more carbon in that area, but there's just not a ton to work with on the size small. So Scor, if you're listening to this, I think this is a pretty big problem that you should fix going forward. Yeah, that's all I've got to say about the Scor 4060. I'm not a reviewist by any means, so if I missed something or you have a question, feel free to drop a comment. Yeah, hopefully I wasn't too harsh on this bike. I seriously got along with this bike really well. I enjoyed riding it. I feel like allowed me to progress as a rider. If you made it this far in the video, really appreciate you sticking around, and we'll catch you in the next one. Choo!